getting into last night's game between the 76ers and the Miami Heat. The Sixers come out in this one in a very close matchup. In order to clinch the 7 seed, they will now be facing the New York Knicks in the 2-7 matchup in the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. But as for last night, frankly, especially in the first half, this was a pretty ugly offensive performance on both ends, where we know Philadelphia is still trying to work Joel Embiid back into shape, back into the groove of things, and statistically he's been still very impactful, but there is some level of conditioning that you just can't replicate necessarily during a training setting, and there are moments where it is a little more apparent than others, but still he is helping the 76ers to close out the regular season on an 8-game win streak, I believe it was, and now they pick up their 9th straight game headed into their series against the New York Knicks. But in the first half of this one, like I mentioned, it was pretty ugly on offense, where Miami's zone defense, which obviously is such a big topic with the Heat, especially when the playoffs come around, and the way that they're able to just throw these looks at opposing teams in these playoff series that just absolutely break their brains. And that's what was happening in the first half of this game, where even in the first quarter alone, the 76ers turned the ball over 7 times, 12 times total in the first half, and that's really how the Heat were able to build up the lead that they were going into halftime, where the Heat haven't had a great half-court offense really all season, and that was further displayed in this game against Philadelphia, but they were able to turn that defense into offense. They were getting fast break opportunities, they were scoring off the turnovers, scored 17 alone in the first half off of turnovers, and limited the 76ers to just 39 points at the half. Jimmy Butler was a massive part of the level of defense and the transition scoring on the other side as well in this first half. He had 4 steals, but at the very end of the first quarter, Kevin Love threw a full court pass to him on the other end. He ends up drawing a foul, getting himself to the free throw line, but he immediately goes down and was grabbing at his right knee, was clearly injured. He was able to play out the rest of the game, but he was absolutely hindered, and that became apparent. Just the level of aggression he was able to play with, the explosiveness that we see from Jimmy Butler in these big moments. We sit around waiting this whole regular season where Butler really wasn't all that tremendous because, frankly, he doesn't care about the regular season. And then for this to happen in the Heat's first, call it a postseason game, don't call it a postseason game. I think the NBA definitely needs to work out how they want to classify these types of games, but again, he ends up going down with his MCL injury. We'll be diving more into the ramifications of that as the show goes on here. But again, Philly was just not able to really get into their game. Specifically, the Heat did a tremendous job of limiting Joel Embiid, who was just 2 of 8 from the field in the first half. And things seemed to be a little ugly there in Philadelphia, where the team was getting booed for much of the second quarter into the third quarter as well. Felt a little bad for Tobias Harris, who was sort of on the receiving end after there was missing a free throw. He stepped out of bounds, he airballed a 3, and the Philly fans were really not just giving it to him, it was the situation as a whole, but he was the recipient of a lot of it at least. And not even joking, it was really until that third quarter, just about halfway through, when Caleb Martin missed 2 free throws to give the Sixers fans this promotion of 2 missed free throws equals free chicken. And once that happened, the crowd really started getting into it. And the Sixers, at least, seemed like maybe it was just a coincidence, who knows. But that's when they started getting their energy up and they started playing their better game. They ended up going on a 9-0 run during that sequence, cut the deficit to 3, and then enter Nick Batum, who was the hero of this game for Philadelphia. As a part of Miami's zone defense, they were making it very difficult. Like I said, first half they were limiting Joel Embiid a lot. They were just making those entry passes very hard for Embiid to go get it. Kevin Love in particular was relentless in denying those entry passes. Embiid was trying to get in around the free throw line and on the block, and the Heat just weren't having it. But then with all of this extra attention being diverted to Joel Embiid, the Sixers started getting these open looks, and it was a pretty rough three-point shooting night for the majority of players on the team, but not for Nick Batum. And inherently, when you're playing a zone defense in basketball, the ways to beat it is to make the right passes and to knock down your open shots. And specifically, again, Batum was the man for the job, where he finished the night 6 of 10 from 3. The rest of the team was 6 of 25, but he really started getting himself going in that second half, which is what helped propel Philadelphia to this win. And it wasn't just the offense from Batum himself. The Sixers as a whole, they stopped turning the ball over like they were in the first half. Again, making those right passes to force the Heat to sort of be behind in their rotations. And again, feeding Embiid, who, as things currently, they always are with Joel Embiid, he requires that extra level of attention. And because of it, from the last time these two teams played in Embiid's second game back from injury from today, he just looked much more comfortable in my eyes, passing out of the double teams when it called for it. He was also spending a lot more time on the perimeter, knocked down a couple threes, including the 3 in the start of the fourth quarter. In this case, he was wide open. He knocks that one down to finally tie the game after Philly had sort of been circling in on the Heat for about a quarter at this point. And then a couple minutes later, once again, it was Nick Batum giving them the go-ahead 3 to give the Sixers their first lead since the first quarter. And the game was highly contested from that point on, a lot of back and forth. The Heat, who sort of had to make this adjustment, like I said, they were really benefiting in that first half from turning defense into offense. Once Philly started playing smarter, it was clear how connected both sides of the ball are for Miami. But it was Tyler Hero who really, when you look at his stat line as a whole, I believe he was 9 of 27 on the night, but yeah, 9 of 27, but he was the one who really started getting himself going. And again, I know that it's not the prettiest box score out there, but I remember when these teams did face off a couple weeks ago, in that fourth quarter, the Heat only scored 17 points. They couldn't even get a decent shot look, really. They had gone 6+ minutes at one point without making a field goal in that game. And as I watched that game, I said, this is clearly why they need Tyler Hero, and the narrative that they're better without him just doesn't fly for me because of the fact that they don't have the elite shot creators, especially with the fact that Jimmy Butler was hindered in this game. And Hero really started getting himself going. I believe he ended up with 12 in the quarter. It was at least 12, could have even been more. But speaking of Hero, it was Batum on the other end who sort of shut him down on 2 straight possessions to seal this game for Philadelphia, where Miami had the ball with about 30-40 seconds left in this game. The game was tied at 96, and the pressure that Batum gave Tyler Hero off ball forced him into a backcourt violation off of a dribble handoff around that half-court mark. Now, it was a little bit of a push, but this was a very physical game, really, on both ends. I forgot how much I disliked the complaining of Kyle Lowry when you get into a playoff setting when it comes to, obviously, respect Kyle Lowry a ton, but, I mean, he throws his arms up at every chance he gets, whether it's a missed call or he gets called for something on the other end. it was giving me, as a Celtics fan at least, a little bit of flashbacks from that miserable series last year that the Celtics just didn't come to play in. But that's just sort of an aside. But this was a very physical game. So Batum, he gets away with that one a little bit. Honestly, it's just how the game was officiated. You can be mad about it if you are a Miami fan, for sure. But at the same time, I think that there were... You can call them all missed calls, or you can say that's just how the refs decided to play it. I thought they were pretty consistent in terms of the physicality throughout the night. But then after that turnover from Hero, Heat went down on the other end, and Kelly Oubre had an and one layup to go, gave Philadelphia the 3-point lead. And then when Miami came back on the other end, a little bit of an erratic. I understand the situation, the way that Tyler Hero was feeling himself and nobody else was getting anything to go, that it was just, I don't think it was quite as bad of a shot take as others seemed to. It definitely wasn't the number one shot take that they could have gotten away with, especially the fact it was with 27 seconds. I think a lot of people were sort of pointing, did Tyler Hero think that a 2-for-1 opportunity was the best way to go there? Not really sure what was going through his head in particular there, but he ends up pulling up from 3, and it was Batum blocking the shot to pretty much seal the game there. Batum finished the game with 20 points. He had that block, and he forced that other turnover, like I mentioned, was really a key 3-point shooter for this Philadelphia team that wasn't getting a ton going on offense in the half court until there was the threat of his shooting. And, you know, at a certain point, I'm never going to question Eric Spoelstra. He obviously knows more than any of us in terms of coaching. But at what point do you start to realize, okay, this defense that we're running, they're starting to actually knock down these shots, or at least specifically Batum is, maybe we should make sure that we're on him. But either way, he ends up being the hero in this one. It wasn't a dominant Joel Embiid game by any means. Like I mentioned, he was 2 of 8 at the half. He ended up 6 of 17, which isn't great, especially for his standards, but also got himself going in the fourth quarter a little bit more. He definitely took advantage of the space that Miami was giving some of these shooters. He knocked down a couple threes. I believe they were both in the fourth quarter. And he ends up in this game with 23 points, 15 rebounds. And like I mentioned, definitely a lot more comfortable in the real game scenarios, passing out of double teams and finding his open shooters, much more so than when he was first returning from injury, had 5 assists in this game as well. And just his presence as well in the paint is something that you sort of can't take away from. Just a sort of separate note here. We've had some interesting nights in terms of some comments made from some of the announcers, and not that I'm, criticizing them necessarily all too much, but the other night we had Reggie Miller when Anthony Davis was going to the free throw line with about, 10 or so seconds left. I think it was maybe even less than that. And Reggie Miller was talking about the idea of intentionally missing the second one. I think it was 3 seconds left at the time. And Miller was talking about the idea of, well, do you purposefully miss this one, not go up by 2 possessions? And I don't really know what his justification for the argument was. I feel like I'm sure he's fine, but probably regretting it a little bit in the coming days. It did not come out as a very basketball IQ heavy comment there. And then last night, I just thought the sort of discourse that was in that first half of Doris Burke acting like she had never heard of foul baiting before, and was sort of getting on JJ Redick's case a little bit for a comment that he made about the job that Joel Embiid does, and Jimmy Butler as well, for foul baiting. And she was acting like it was this unheard of thing before, and she sort of tried to roast NBA Twitter, talking about I don't pay attention to any of that, which is probably fair to some degree, but also I don't know. It was a very strange comment to me for Doris, who obviously, and for good reason, is a very big fan of Joel Embiid. She's made that clear through her career here, but I just thought that was a very strange moment there, and we've just piled on to the Reggie Miller comments from the other night. Feel like we're off to a little bit of an interesting start, announcers wise, in terms of the NBA playoffs here. Again, not technically the playoffs, but you know what I mean. But obviously, in this game, other than that, Tyrese Maxey wasn't really great himself. Now, there were a couple instances, you just see the burst with him. He is able to just ramp up into another gear, really, when you're not expecting it. He struggled from the field, specifically from the three-point line, like we covered. Everybody on Philadelphia really did. He finished with 19 points. And then on the Heat side of this, it was Hero with 25 on a pretty inefficient night, but also, again, thought that he was creating some really impactful buckets for the Heat down the stretch of this one. And Jimmy Butler, who had his 5 steals and, had moments of looking great, especially in that first half, the first quarter. I think he had 10 of his 19 points then, but went down with that knee injury at the end of the first quarter, and we have some updates on that situation. So we're going to be taking our first break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into the ramifications of Jimmy Butler's injury and what it means for the Miami Heat going forward. So stick with us, and we will be right back.